Welcome to the UnCeiling You podcast, where we help women take responsibility for their work, their leadership, and their lives, so they can make an impact without burning out. Years ago, I noticed something strange in leadership meetings. Whenever a complicated problem surfaced, people slowly started turning toward me, not because I was the boss, not because it had been assigned to me, but because everyone assumed I would figure it out. And for a long time, I thought that was a compliment. Being counted on excited me, until I started noticing something else. Every time I solved one difficult problem, two more appeared. Problems multiplied like replicating rabbits. More decisions, more questions, more responsibility. And that's when I began to understand why so many highly competent people quietly start to feel very alone in leadership. What surprised me most was this. The problem wasn't workload, it wasn't stress, and it wasn't leadership pressure. It was something structural that almost no one talks about. And in this episode, I want to unpack that pattern and show you how to see it clearly in your own leadership role. Once again, welcome to the UnCeiling You podcast, where we help women take appropriate responsibility so they can lead powerfully, contribute fully, and avoid carrying the entire system alone.
I want to start with a moment I noticed years ago. I was sitting in a meeting where a complicated problem came up. One of those problems where nobody quite knew what to do next. And something interesting happened. People slowly started turning towards me, not because I was the boss, not because it was technically my responsibility, but because they assumed I could figure it out. And honestly, I loved it. I loved being counted on to solve complex problems. I craved that type of work. Doing the hard work made me feel safe and valued because I grew up in a household where financial security wasn't always guaranteed. I remembered being told as a kid that we were lucky just to have food on the table and a roof over our heads. So as an adult, being financially safe became very important to me. I never wanted my family to worry about money, so I welcomed those hard projects. For me, solving complex problems meant I was doing well. It meant I was respected, and in my mind, respect meant protection. If I kept delivering results, then during economic downturns, I would be safe. Every successful project felt like crossing a finish line with a medal being placed around my neck. It was exhilarating. But eventually, I started noticing something else happening. Every time I solved one difficult problem, two more magically appeared. More questions, more decisions, more responsibility. And slowly, something else interesting began to happen. Uncertainty started flowing towards me, not because it was assigned to me, but because I was the person who could organize it the fastest, and that's when I realized something important. Competence attracts responsibility, and if you're not careful, that responsibility doesn't arrive neatly. It accumulates. Here's the pattern I noticed over and over again. When someone is capable, reliable, and calm under pressure, organizations start leaning on them. Not intentionally, it just happens. Someone says, "Hey, can you take a look at this? Hey, can you help think this through? Would you mind sitting in on this meeting?" And at first, it feels so good. It feels like trust. But slowly, responsibility begins to accumulate. Not just operational responsibility, but emotional responsibility too. You become the person who anticipates problems, stabilizes the room, connects the dots, absorbs uncertainty. And if you're that person, you're like most people who don't realize they're even doing it. They just know that when things feel unclear or complicated, you're the person who makes it make sense. And over time, something subtle starts to happen. You start noticing something. If you don't solve the problem, it just sits there. and no one moves it forward. Nobody picks it up. And for me, seeing that problem just sit there unresolved is almost unbearable. I'm the oldest child in my family, and for me to watch a problem sit unresolved, it's like having an itch that you can't scratch. The itch has to be scratched. So picking up the ball and running with it becomes my way of scratching that itch. And without even realizing it, you become that person carrying more and more of the system. But something else started to happen too. The more responsibility I carried, the fewer people I can honestly talk with. Part of it was internal. Once I finally felt financially safe, my identity got tied to what I produced for the organization, to the company. The results I generated, the problems I solved. So admitting uncertainty and concern, it just felt risky. But there was another dynamic happening too. When you're highly competent, people bring you their uncertainty. They bring you their problems. They bring you their concerns. And very rarely do they want to absorb yours. Or do you feel willing to open up? So leaders slowly become containers. People who hold complexity for the system, we absorb uncertainty. We regulate our reactions. We stabilize the room. We perform even when we feel depleted. And from the outside, it can look like we've got everything handled, but internally, something else can be happening. Your brain never quite shuts off, and you're thinking about decisions, conversations, risks, how things might unfold. And if you're ever laid awake at night replaying a conversation or planning how you're going to handle something the next day, then you know exactly what I mean. There's actually a neurological reason this happens. When people bring you your problems, your brain doesn't just process the logistics of the decision. It processes the emotional context too. The limbic system, particularly the amygdala, is constantly scanning for uncertainty and potential threat. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex is trying to organize information, plan responses, and regulate emotion. So when you become the person responsible for stabilizing situations, both of those systems can stay active longer than they normally would. Leadership responsibility isn't just a cognitive load, it's a neurological load. Your brain is simultaneously processing uncertainty, risk, emotion, social dynamics, future consequences, and the more complex the environment becomes, the longer those systems stay active. Most high-performing people assume the problem is time management. But research in performing psychology suggests something different. The real constraint for high responsibility roles is usually energy management. When your brain is continuously monitoring problems, conversations, risks, and outcomes, it stays in a state of sustained activation. This means your cognitive energy is being spent long before the workday ends. And I know for me, by 3 p.m., I am wiped out, which explains something many leaders experience. They can handle incredibly complex problems during the day, but their brain won't shut off at night because their mind is still scanning systems, still anticipating what might break, still trying to make sure nothing drops. Eventually, I realized something important. Leadership loneliness isn't just about hierarchy. It's about responsibility. The more responsibility you carry, the fewer people truly understand your context. If you're a highly competent person, something else often happens. Competence slowly becomes your identity. You become the capable one, the person who can figure things out, the person who can handle the complexity, the person who people turn to when things are unclear. And once that identity forms, it becomes surprisingly difficult to step outside of it because capable people start to believe things like, I should be able to handle this. I shouldn't need help. I should already know the answer. And notice that word should. Delegating starts to feel risky. Saying no, it feels like failure because part of your identity has become tied to being the person who handles things. Instead of stepping back, you step forward again and again and again until one day you look around and realize something surprising. You're carrying far more of the system than you ever intended to. A while ago, there was a moment that changed my whole perspective. I started trying to understand this pattern more clearly. At first, I was doing it for myself because I could feel something wasn't right. I started to feel burned out, and I realized something that really bothered me was missing. I was missing part of my daughter's life. I was physically present at her important events, but mentally, I wasn't always there. My mind, it was still at work, thinking about problems, planning conversations, trying to figure out how to solve things. And and sometimes I was missing smaller events too. Track meets, golf matches, moments that actually mattered. And that realization hit me really hard because it didn't match the kind of mom I wanted to be. So I started asking myself a different question. Instead of asking, can I handle this? I've proven that several times. I asked, is this actually really mine to carry? Many highly competent people develop something psychologists sometimes refer to as over responsibility patterns. If you've been rewarded your whole life for being reliable, capable, and solution orientated, your brain learns something powerful. If I step in, things work. So when the problems appear, your instinct is to fix it, not because someone asked you to, but because you care about the outcome. You care about the team and you care about doing things well. And over time, responsibility slowly expands, not formally, but informally. I didn't want to miss things anymore, and I wanted to handle the responsibility differently. So I developed something I call now the responsibility audit. The idea is simple. Highly competent people often end up carrying responsibility that was never formally assigned to them, and then they feel resentful. They see the problem, the ball is sitting there, and they pick it up and run with it. Not because someone asked them to, but because they care. So responsibility slowly expands, and the audit helps people to ask a very important question. What am I carrying that's not actually mine? And what have I quietly absorbed along the way? Because when responsibility is unclear, the brain stays in monitoring mode. You're always scanning, always anticipating, always trying to make sure nothing drops. And over time, that becomes exhausting. Research in role clarity shows that when responsibilities are ambiguous, the brain compensates by increasing vigilance. Let me say that again. Research on role clarity shows that when responsibilities are ambiguous, the brain compensates by increasing vigilance. You begin tracking invisible work. You start managing problems that technically belong to somebody else. And eventually the system begins to rely on it without anyone ever formally assigning it. So if you're someone who sometimes feels alone in leadership, I want to offer you 3 questions. First, what responsibility did I formally agree to? Second, What responsibility did I assume because I care about the outcome? Third, what responsibility am I carrying emotionally that actually belongs to somebody else? Those three questions alone can be surprisingly powerful because leadership isn't about carrying everything. It's about carrying precisely what is yours. Competence is a gift, but it shouldn't quietly become a burden you carry by yourself. Competence attracts responsibility, but without boundaries, it also attracts unstructured responsibility, the kind nobody planned, but everybody assumes someone will handle. And sometimes the most powerful shift a leader can make is to recognize what was never theirs to carry in the first place. If you'd like to explore this pattern in your own leadership, you can download the Responsibility Audit. It's free, and the link is in the show notes. It only takes a few minutes, but so many leaders find it reveals something surprising, where responsibility was truly theirs and where it was quietly expanded without everyone assigning it. Because leadership isn't about carrying everything. It's about carrying precisely what is yours. Before we close today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. Leadership is often described as the ability to take responsibility. I've said it over and over and over. Take radical responsibility. It excites me for sure. But something I've learned over the years is that leadership is just as much about understanding how responsibility moves through the system. In many organizations, responsibility doesn't stay neatly within a job description. It shifts, it drifts, it accumulates around people who care the most and who can solve the hardest problems. But when responsibility concentrates too heavily in one place, something subtle begins to happen. Some people become overloaded. Others become underutilized, even overlooked. And over time, good people may begin stepping back or leaving the organization entirely, which means the very strength that made the system work, competence can unintentionally make the organization weaker if responsibility isn't distributed well. In this series, we'll explore how tools like role clarity and contribution mapping can help teams make responsibility visible again, so people can contribute more fully and leadership becomes something the whole system shares. Until next time, thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.